Hello, welcome to the 12th Annual Pre-Health Student Alliance. I will please welcome Lisa Stevens, Assistant Dean for Admissions.
All right, thank you. Again, I'm Lisa Stevenson, Assistant Dean for Admissions and Director of Diversity Programs at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri. So you guys have all heard of St. Louis, Missouri, right? We've been in the news quite a bit. And those Cardinals, hey, they're playing this weekend, the playoffs. So my role today is to talk to you about time management and give you some tips on how to plan for your career, whether it's a medical career or you're going into nursing or physical therapy and so on. So I think as a start, because this will help me, raise your hand if you are pre-med, meaning you want to become a physician. How many of you are pre-nursing? Pre-PT, physical therapy, OT, occupational therapy. So what am I missing? What are other, PA, physician assistant? Okay. All right, well, I'm at the School of Medicine, so I recruit medical students. I sit on I actually sit on the admissions committee, but I chair one of the regional subcommittees, the West, which is one of the reasons why I'm here today. But I think most of the things that I'm going to talk about will apply no matter what your field of interest is. Okay. This is from a quote from General Colin Powell. There really are no secrets to success. I mean, there isn't like this magic system that I can tell you about. It's really more just being very practical, trying some things will work, some things won't, and then you go back and you sort of reconfigure things. So as I say, preparation, planning, and yes, you will make mistakes. So what are we working with in terms of time from a practical standpoint? 24 hours in each day, 7 days a week, 4 weeks typically in a month, 12 months in a year. You're either on a semester or quarter system. And you see, in general, we're looking at 4 to 5 years for a bachelor's degree. Sometimes that can vary, but that's pretty typical. So personal management is a big part of time management. So you may want to, as a start, reflect and think about what you're doing now. How do you spend your time? Why do you spend it the way you do? And are you using your time wisely? And viewing your life as a whole, like your academics and your career goals are one part of it, but you have family, you have friends, you have a personal life, you have extracurricular activities that you enjoy. So how do you manage all that? And when you think of where you are now and where you would like to be, who benefits from your actions long run? You know, what's the end goal? And we'll talk about that. So is it important? Of course, it's really important. It's pretty obvious. But let's delve a little bit into why it's important to manage your time wisely and to manage it on a personal level. If you keep things organized, then things tend to be predictable. Now, sometimes things come up that you can't plan for, but it just lessens the anxiety level if you have a framework for going about your business, whether it's on a daily basis and then broadening it out in terms of your approach to your education. It'll help you with both your personal and your professional goals and objectives. And as I mentioned before, decreases stress, and that's very, very important in today's world. And you're confident, because when you know what you're doing and you have a plan and you focus and you have an end goal, it'll help you focus and not get off track and easily distracted. And your relationships will benefit from it, your family, your colleagues, your classmates. So it's really, when you think about who benefits from those actions, those are some of the folks who would, and you will yourself. So how do you go about doing this, managing your time wisely? It means engaging in behaviors, and I'll get very specific in a moment, that will help you meet your objectives. And you have to avoid procrastination, and that's a big one. You know, we all do it. We all do it. But you really have to manage it. I have a 11-year-old daughter right now who is a big procrastinator. So I know a lot about that, and I'm constantly telling her, you know, if you break it up into small pieces, it'll be more manageable. It's a work in progress. That's all I have to say. And being consistent is important, too. So let's look at the challenges that you face if you're a student or you're going to be a student. There are things that you have to do. Those are fixed. And then there's some things where you have a little more flexibility with your schedule. And I may ask for audience participation at this point. So what do you think? Classes, fixed or flexible? Like once you select your classes. Because at the beginning of the year it is flexible, but once you do so, it's what? Excellent. Sleeping? I'm hearing both. What? It's flexible, but it's important. And maybe it should be fixed as much as you can do so. Studying? In terms of when you do it, right? But in terms of getting it done, it has to get done. Exercise, sports? Flexible, but important, right? It's got to be part of your life. You'll benefit from that. Work, internship, fixed. I mean, if you have to be there at a certain time and they're expecting you there, then there's no way around that. You have to be there. Personal care, grooming. What would you say? Flexible, but you have to think about those around you, right? You want to be sensitive to that. Family commitments. Fixed. I mean, I would think it would be fixed. And you have some flexibility as to when you see them or when you call them, but it's important. Meal preparation, eating, cleanup. Flexible, but you got to eat. Transportation. Yeah, especially if you're just depending upon public transportation. You got to be there at a certain time to catch the bus. That's what you have to do. Relaxing, TV, video games, you know, time to yourself. Flexible. Socializing, entertainment, which you can see some of these are kind of, you know, overlap a bit. So I think the moral of the story is there are very few things that are fixed. You know, so a lot of times it can go either way and there's overlap and it's not black and white. And depending on the situation, the context, something may be fixed or it may be flexible, but they all have their value and their role in your life. So I mentioned before, if you're going to go about this, you have to, you know, I've got avoid procrastination on there, but I would say keep it to a minimum. We all do it. This sounds really tedious, but I think it's helpful. If you can track your activity by making a daily schedule and following it, I think you'll really benefit from it. I do. This morning, that was one of the things I was doing, was like reworking my schedule for the upcoming week. Create time management goals, short and long term. Look what's going on for, say, maybe the upcoming week, and then broaden it out a bit and think about, well, what's going on the rest of the semester? What exams do I have? What papers are due? And work within that framework. And then you have to make sure that you come up with a plan for meeting all those goals. And using a time management tool, I think the best thing would be probably, like most of you, I'm going to imagine, have smartphones. And there are all kinds of ways you can use that to your benefit. But even if you don't, way, way back in the old days, people used paper calendars, you know, or planners. And those work really well, too. So again, electronic or paper time management tool. Start with prioritizing the tasks for the day. And the way that you do that, literally, this may be on the upcoming slide, is you look at what you need to do, put them in rank order, or maybe have 3 categories, A, B, C, with A being, you know, it's just got to be done today. B and C, B would be great if it gets done, but it's okay if it's not. And C, if it doesn't get done, I can definitely do it the next day. When you can, try to delegate, outsource. Let's say that you are working on a group project. Divide up the responsibilities so that one person isn't overloaded with things to do. Routines help. Stick to them as much as possible. It makes it easier. The more you have to stop and think and regroup, like, what I need to do next, you can be wasting time. And the other thing is to set time limits for tasks, and that's going to vary between, depending on what it is, but that will also keep you on schedule. And again, with your smartphone, there's all kinds of, there's a timer ability and other things to help you with that. So again, big picture, you get the semester calendar, you look at the events, the due dates, paper exams, presentations, meetings, update your calendar. Put that on first. That gives you a broader look at what needs to be done. Then you can divide it up into weekly calendar, class times, meetings, standing appointments, eating, sleeping, exercising. Boy, that's a lot, isn't it? So any ideas, any thoughts about how you even go about tackling all of this? Yes? So you're saying basically have, like, if there's a daily schedule, have something going on each hour. So any ideas on how you approach the family? You've got your career goals and you're trying to study, and sometimes families don't understand, especially parents, don't always understand how much time it takes to do certain things. So any ideas or thoughts about how you explain that to them without offending them, but also getting them to understand, I've got to do this. I'm a person on a mission here. How do you approach them? Yes?
Just explain to them like why it's important to do what you're doing, and then maybe like convince them that it's important to do what you're doing.
Great. And then I think maybe you set aside a time. You say, okay, I've got this exam coming up, so I really can't, stop by this week, but next week at this day, this time, we'll do this. And then stick to it. So it's a lot. And sleeping, you don't want to just say, well, I just won't sleep. That doesn't work. Okay, maybe you get away with it for maybe one exam, but to make it a habit, it'll catch up with you. So it's just a matter of being really, really efficient and just setting time limits. And will you get it right the first time? No, you won't. And then you'll go back and rework your schedule. Say, okay, I thought that was going to take 45 minutes and ended up taking an hour and 15 minutes, so I need to build that into what I do, and how am I going to adjust things on my calendar. So it's really ongoing. So just as you were saying, have a fixed schedule, things you know you have to do, and then you build in everything else around it. Some people feel that if you study at a regular time and place, that helps. That kind of builds into the routine. If you study right after a lecture class where everything is fresh in your mind and you can write notes, that's certainly to your benefit. You can study during the gaps between classes. But I always say, what works for you, For some people, I know at Washington University, we have some students who stay on campus and they study. We have study carrels for them. And then other times others will go home and study because for them that works really well. So I think you have to know what works well for you. But watch it, make sure you're not procrastinating. If you go home, are you turning on the TV, and next thing you know, you've wasted 45 minutes. So you have to know yourself, and you have to be really focused. Now, in terms of how much you study on a particular topic, I would say probably no more than 2 hours on any course at a time, because after that, you have to think, are you really making the best use of your time? Unless you're cramming. And if you're cramming, you shouldn't be cramming anyway. Hopefully you're breaking it up so that you're not waiting until the last minute to study for a test. And then you may have to go back and do a cumulative review for a particular topic, and then you need to build in more time for that. And again, priorities are really important. You may start out in the morning thinking, okay, I'm going to do these 5 things, and then by lunchtime, you realize, okay, this order isn't going to work, and I need to reconfigure things and do these things, and maybe tomorrow work on the rest of it. And fit in all the other things that are important to your health. You have to eat. You should exercise. It says double your time estimated for an activity or assignment. If you could do that, that's great. I think it's easier said than done. But I think the notion is that if you double your time and then you go into it and realize it didn't take as much time, you probably feel better about it, and then it frees up your time to do other things. And all the while, you should be updating your calendar. That is just ongoing. So this is really a lot of what I do in my job. So I recruit, but I also interview students for medical school. I have to write reports. I have other projects that I have to work on as well. So I have a list for every day, and I do have them in order. I break it down into small pieces. And sometimes I'll think, okay, I'll get through all these things and things will be just fine, but things will come up, emails, phone calls, and the next thing you know, you have to rearrange things. So that's when I was referring to earlier about the A, B, and C priority. I think it works really well, and it will help you zero in on what's really crucial and to get that done first. But keep in mind that you may have to reconfigure things as other things come into the picture. But the bottom line is to make sure that the highest priority items are taken care of first. So I'm going to broaden it out a little bit, unless you guys have specific questions about making your daily to-do list. So I'm going to talk about, in this case, because this is what I know, applying to medical school. But again, I think the general principle will apply to other programs. So you're thinking about applying to medical school. What are some steps that you should take? And keep in mind that most of the things that I'm talking about, people in my role, we look for these things when we look for your application. We want to see that you've investigated the field of medicine, and you can do that through shadowing, physician shadowing. You can do that through volunteering at a clinic. I know a lot of students are able to volunteer at a free walk-in clinic, and that's really great because then you get a sense of the community, that the surrounding community. And I know at Washington University and most schools, there's a lot of emphasis in taking care of the needs of everyone, but particularly those from underserved backgrounds. You need to pay attention to your pre-med requirements, and they vary from school to school. I mean, there's some commonalities to all of them, but there are also some exceptions. For instance, at Washington University, we require calculus. Other schools don't. Other schools require English composition course. We don't. So you really need to know that. And for those of you who are pre-med, there is something called the Medical Student Admission Requirement Guidebook. And it has a profile for almost every medical school, and you can check those requirements. So you got to make sure that as you're planning your course load for school, that you're hitting all those requirements. And you have to do well, because we're going to look at your grades, we're going to look at your academic record, and we'll see everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but hopefully mostly good. And in general, just as a tip, we like to see an upward trend. So if things are a little rough the first year, but then your grades improve, we much rather see that than the other way around. I think that would apply to most programs. The standardized test for med school is the Medical College Admissions Test, or the MCAT, and you want to definitely make sure that you prepare for that properly. Those of you who are going through the pre-med route, you probably know that MCAT is going to change next year, and there'll be more emphasis on sort of social studies or social sciences, more emphasis on biochemistry, critical analysis. So you need to make sure that you take all the classes you need to take before you take the MCAT. You want to be in the best position that you can be in when you sit for the exam. Extracurricular activities, we want to make sure you're well-rounded. When I say we, Washington University, we like to see leadership. And it can be in a variety of different ways. Maybe you are on a varsity sports team. Maybe you are in charge of a particular student group. Maybe you do some teaching or tutoring on the side. Those are all forms of leadership. Mentoring is also very important because what you're doing is you're going into a service-oriented field, so we like to see that, and it can be in a variety of different areas. But we also know some students have to work a significant number of hours a week, and that may cut into your time to do other activities, and that's fine, and just make a note of it on your application. Research experience, again, you need to know the medical schools. Some require it, some don't. We don't, but if you know anything about Washington University, we are sort of known as having a pretty rigorous research resources and programs available to students. So I would say try to get some research experience if you can. If you can't, it's not the end of the world. Character is kind of related to the letters of evaluation. We'll look for that in a couple of different areas. We'll read your recommendation letters, and we want to hear about what faculty have to say about you or other folks who may know you well. We'll be able to pick up on that in a personal statement that you have to write for the MCAT application, the common application for med school. So we will be able to get some of that information just from reading what you submit and then reading what your recommenders submit as well. So that covers the letters of evaluation too. And then service, because being a physician, I mean, it is very much of a service-oriented role and career, we'd like to see that you have empathy for others, that you can demonstrate that, and it's not just a one-time or two-time sort of situation, that you have sort of a consistent demonstration of that interest in helping others. And it can be in various forms, as I said before. It could be tutoring, it could be teaching, it could be mentoring, it could be, in a sense, depending on what you're doing, working. So lots of flexibility in what it can be. It's great if it can be medically related, but sometimes that can't happen. And then most medical schools require an interview. And that is a chance for us to get to know you better. So what happens is that we look at all these other things first, and then we make a determination as to whether or not we're going to invite you to campus for an interview. And it's in that interview that we're going to take a look at your communication skills. We're going to ask questions about your application. So it gets back to the character. We're going to be sort of taking a look at that as we're speaking to you. And being organized and managing your time really well will show up in your responses. For those of us who have been interviewing for a while, we can pick up on those things. So again, it all ties back to making the best use of your time because it's going to show up in other places. Any questions about becoming a competitive applicant for med school? Okay. So I told you what needs to be done, and now I'm going to tell you the preferred time frame for doing those things. So if you want to explore the field of medicine, some students are able to do that in high school, which is great. You know, they'll shadow, they'll volunteer at a hospital. Some are able to do some summer programs, summer prep programs, which is great as well. But college is fine too, in terms of learning more about the medical field in general. And try to be as resourceful as you can. You know, it's not unusual to ask your pediatrician if he or she, if it's okay with them, if you shadow them. That's perfectly fine. The pre-med requirements, ideally, you should be thinking about that even in high school. You know, you should know that having great study habits, being strong in science and math, that's going to carry you over into college when you have to enroll in the pre-med requirements. So that's why it says foundation established prior to college. Get those good study habits going early, and then you implement them during the college years. And that's when your college academic performance really comes into play. Now let's say you don't do so well in your undergraduate years. We usually recommend that students enroll in a post-bac program where they can work on their study habits and focus on some of those classes that gave them trouble in college. MCAT, preparation begins first year of college. And you really need to make sure that you take the exam at the right time. You don't want to take the exam before you've had a physics course. That would not be a very, very good idea. And if you have an advisor, they should be able to help you with that determination. But even if you don't have an advisor, if you go to most of the major med school websites, they'll have some advice for you about that. Or you can even call a medical school too, and we're happy to help. Extracurricular activities or work, again, you can be doing that in high school, carries on into college, and use your summers wisely as well. Again, time management, because you'll be asked about it. You know, what did you do on your summers off? Did you take classes? Were you exploring maybe another career, which is fine? Were you able to enroll in a summer research program? All those are great ways to spend your time during the summer. Sometimes you just have to make money too, and we understand that. But you'll be asked about it during an interview. And this list goes on and on. Research experience. Sometimes you can get it in high school, but typically it's during college. And a lot of students, what they're doing now is taking a year after graduation, college graduation, and they're finding an opportunity to conduct research. It's getting to the point now that we almost expect students to take a year after college to do other things before they start med school. If you go straight through, that's fine. But students ask all the time, is it going to look bad if I do something else for a while? And not at all. The letters of evaluation, the key to that is that you want to make sure that the people who end up submitting letters for you, that they know you really well, because we're counting on them to tell us about you. And if the letter's kind of vague in general, like, oh, this person made this grade, seemed to be really conscientious, and then they sign it, that doesn't tell us very much. So make sure that you start building those relationships early. And it's hard when the school is large, and we recognize that. So maybe if you can't get the professor, maybe you can get the TA that you got to know in the smaller study sessions. But make sure that they know you and know you well. Community service, again, could be high school, but during and even after college. And yes, character assessed up until the present time, and a projection is going to be made. So in other words, what that means is that we take a look at everything about you, what we can get from the application, from the recommendation letters. If you come to our school to interview, or any school to interview, we're assessing you. And then we're making a projection, like, okay, based on what we know now, do we think this person will do well and be the kind of medical student that we want to have at our school? And we spend a lot of time in admission committee meetings discussing that. So it's very, very important. So just getting back to my earlier point, who really benefits from your actions? You know, if you're taking care to make the best use of your time, starting out on a very, very micro level, organizing your day, changing the priorities if you need to because something comes up, but then looking out and beyond the day and looking at your semester and looking at what I need to do and how am I going to fit in time to get that research experience, which I think would be really helpful for me, or how am I going to make sure that I take enough time out to prepare for the MCAT. All that has to be taken into consideration. And it does take some practice, and it may not work out perfectly, but you just keep at it and keep at it. And the benefits will be a lot. You'll benefit a great deal. It'll make your life a lot easier if you're organized. Organized, but recognize that things will happen that you have no control over. And you just have to kind of step back and then regroup and move forward. And your colleagues, your friends, your family, it'll make it easier for them as well to know someone that they can count on, who's reliable, and who will come through with the things they say that they're going to do. And your future patients will benefit as well. You're going to be a busy, busy practitioner, and being organized with your time and being surrounded by people who have the same kind of attitude will really, really benefit your patients. So lots of people will benefit, as well as your friends and family. So final words. It'll get rough at times, but don't get discouraged. Maybe take a deep breath, or do what I do and go to a yoga class, and then go back at it again. And this is when having friends, having mentors really helps you. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And keep your eyes on the prize. If that's what you want to do, whether it's becoming a nurse or becoming a doctor or a PA, stay focused and you'll get there. So at this point, and yes, the medical profession needs you. We definitely need you. So thanks, and I left some time, several minutes actually, for questions. You've been pretty quiet, but I'm happy to go through some concepts again if you need it. Yes?
What was that thing that you were saying, what do you look for in an interview for medical school?
What we look for? So we've had some chance to review your application in most cases. So by the time you get to our school, one of the first things we're doing is we're going to compare what we read about you and what we see in front of us. So we're going to ask you questions and make sure that that you match up, you know, that you're like this totally different person than what's on paper. And that does happen every once in a while. Sometimes there are things on your application that someone else has probably reviewed it or has reviewed it, and they have questions. A common question might be, there's a break here in their classes, like what happened here, because they're not enrolled in classes between this year and that year. Ask her what happened there. That would be common. Or we might see a couple of low grades in one particular semester, and we'll ask you what happened. And then we'll ask things like, you know, what do you do for fun? We want to make sure you're well-rounded. We want to make sure that you've done some form of service and that you're able to talk about it and not just give us a list, but give us a sense of what you got out of the experience. We are going to ask you in some form or fashion why you would like to be a physician. So you should be prepared to answer that question. I mean, we think about it, you apply to med school. We're going to ask that question. And if you decide to get some research experience, you're able to do that, and you put it on your application, you'll be asked about it. Some interviewers are tougher than others about that, so if you've got research experience, you should be able to explain it, and the others will be more easygoing about it. Pretty much, in general, anything that you put on your application, except for your recommendation letters, we can ask you about it. So remember, sometimes there's a time lapse between the time you submit everything and the time you get an interview. So one of the things you want to do, gets back to time management, is go back and review your application and know and be prepared to answer questions. That's a good question. Yes?
Is it possible to take the MCAT after you submit your application? As long as you submit your scores as soon as you take it?
Up until, and I'm going to answer that question for Washington University only because other schools may do things differently. So once you say you submit your MCAS application and you list Washington University as one of the schools that should get it, then we know, okay, she's applying here. So we wait to get all the information. So if we have everything but your MCAT, we won't act upon your application until we get it. Now the latest we'll take it is September, because they're turning it around so quickly, we would get it in time. Back in the old days, it would take so long for us to get your scores that a lot of times we couldn't accept a September score. So once we get that score and you become complete, we have everything, then we make an evaluation as to whether or not we're going to invite you to an interview. So we start interviewing, we actually started a couple weeks ago, and we'll go into like the end of February, sometime early March. So let's say you took the MCAT in September and we got your scores like in October. That's still enough time for you to get an interview. It may take, you may not interview until December or early January, but that's still okay. Yes?
So when you mentioned low grades, were you thinking like B's and low or C's and low?
I think, again, we're going to zero in on those pre-med classes. So I mentioned earlier that we require calculus. So if you make a C in calculus and everything else looks great, that's probably not going to be a problem. But if we start seeing a C in physics, a C in organic chemistry, C+ in general chemistry, then that's a red flag, because that tells us you're struggling a bit. So you'd really have to work hard to reverse that trend. One way a couple ways you can do that, you can take the classes again, or you take advanced science classes and do really well in them. and then we'll feel more, and then we're also going to pay a lot of attention to your MCAT. That's when your MCAT becomes more important, because we see these grades that look a little shaky, and then we want to see if the same thing happens with your MCAT. So again, we're looking at trends. We're definitely looking at trends. But again, if you can turn that around and do really well after that, that will help you. Yes?
So the first thing you're going to specifically look at are the grades and MCAT, and then everything else afterwards.
I'm trying to think of how when I'm actually looking at an application, I probably look at the academic record first. And then we look at everything else. But it's not like if I look at your academic record and I don't like what I see, then I'm just not going to look at the rest of it. I'll still look at the whole thing, because we want to get a holistic view of you. And then we go from there to determine whether or not we think we should invite you to an interview. So the big thing with med schools is that just because you apply doesn't mean you're going to be offered an interview. So you want to get that interview. That is the next step. Yes?
What is the ideal time frame between taking the MCAT test and then going for the interview process?
It's really not, the MCAT, doesn't really factor into the interview, only in that you're considered incomplete if you don't have your MCAT score submitted to us. So really, if the question is getting your entire application in, because that's the only way we can determine whether or not we're going to invite you to an interview. We will, in terms of the years, we'll accept like 3 years. We'll go back 3 years. Then after that, you got to retake it again. These are really good questions. Any others? Yes.
Is it true that the early that you apply, the better? Like it will increase your chances of?
Yes, and I didn't mention this. We're on a rolling admissions basis. Some schools are, some schools aren't. What that means is that as we're getting applications in, we're reviewing them and making decisions as to whether or not we're going to invite a student to campus for an interview. So if you get everything in early and we haven't had a chance to see the rest of the class because everybody else is still getting their paperwork in, it does give you a slight advantage. That means you get into the campus to interview early. We get to see you first before we see everybody else. So in general, this goes back to time management. Pay attention to deadlines when you're applying, because it'll make a huge difference, especially if the schools that you're interested in are on a rolling admissions basis. And how do you find that out? It goes back to what I said before about the MSAR, the Medical Students Admission Requirement Booklet. That will have all that information. They'll have profiles for each school. So it wouldn't hurt to actually have like a little chart for yourself, or the schools that you're interested in, to know their deadlines, to know what they require. And know whether or not they have a rolling admissions process. Because that will make a difference in terms of maybe which school that you tackle first. Okay? Yes?
Do like MMI interviews?
We don't. Each school has their own approach, and that's the multiple mini interview approach, where you go from station to station and you have this question that you have to answer, and sometimes you may have to work out a problem. And we pride ourselves on having the one-on-one interview where we get to know you as a person. So you're going to spend anywhere from 20 minutes to maybe 45 minutes speaking to one person. You will probably have 2 interviews, 2 different people, 2 different times during your visit. But we like that approach as opposed to M.B.A. But there are other schools who do that. So that brings up a good point. That's another thing you need to know to add to your spreadsheet. What kind of interview does each school conduct? Because that will make a difference in how you approach and prepare for the interview. Yes?
I know that sometimes, like on your interview, there's also a tour. It's kind of a visit. I heard that you are kind of being evaluated the entire time. Does your university itself evaluate the entire time, or just?
That's a really good question. So the general rule of thumb is the minute that you step foot on the campus, you're being evaluated. Even if people say, oh, no, this isn't part of the interview, relax, you're on. Because those of us who are in admissions, who sit on the committees, and we hear feedback. We hear feedback from the tour guides. The 4th years, at our school, 4th year medical students give tours for the applicants. If we hear back from a tour guide that this student was really obnoxious, that can make a huge difference. I mean, it can be like a deal breaker. When you check in and the admissions operations person gives you your badge and your materials and all of that, be polite, say thank you. Even when you're calling, be polite, because believe me, we will hear about it if a student is inappropriate, and it is a huge, huge factor. That's a really good question. When you go to lunch, like at our school, you may go to lunch with some third-year medical students, so they're in the middle of their rotations, and they're coming in their scrubs, and they look kind of laid back and maybe a little bit tired. You're still on. You're still on, even though there may not be a faculty member present or anyone from the admissions office present. They haven't been told to submit an evaluation, but if something seems odd to them, they do know to come back to us and let us know. So you're on from the moment you step foot there, actually even before that when you call and ask for help. Okay? Great questions. Well, good luck with everything. And I think I'm in the booklet somewhere if you ever need to contact me. So good luck. Thank you.